Most of the deductive arguments you encounter won't come as neatly packaged as those in the last exercise. Most will be embedded in longer passages. Some will make their logical moves in ways that are not quite so obvious as the arguments you just dealt with. Still, the basic technique for recognizing deductive argument forms in more complex passages is the same as in the exercises you just did. Look for logical connectives. Assign letters to the independent clauses joined by the logical connectives. Look for other occurrences of those clauses elsewhere in the passage. Remember that you may find arguments embedded in larger passages. Some of the phrases, clauses, and sentences in the larger passage will not be premises of the argument. You do not need to symbolize everything in the passage. Symbolize only those clauses or sentences that express the premise or conclusion of the argument. One big difference between this exercise and the last one is that you will need to know about alternative ways of expressing if P, then Q. Three of the most common are P if Q means if Q, then P. P only if Q means if P, then Q. P unless Q means if not Q, then P. Another problem that sometimes arises has to do with the little word not. Consider, for example, the following argument. If the murder was committed at noon, then the butler did not do it. If the butler did not do it, then the maid must have done it. Therefore, if the murder was committed at noon, then the maid must have done it. It would be natural to symbolize the argument as follows. If A, then not B. If not B, then C. Therefore, if A, then C. On the face of it, this may not look like a hypothetical syllogism, which is Rule 24. Since the discussion of hypothetical syllogisms makes no mention of nots. If you look just a little more carefully, though, you will see that this argument does exactly what any good hypothetical syllogism does. It makes a tight link between A and C by means of an intermediate term, which happens to be not B in this case. To see this clearly, try using a new symbol for not B, like D. Then the argument reads, if A, then D, if D, then C, therefore if A, then C. And you can see that this argument forms just the sort of chain that makes hypothetical syllogisms valid. By the same token, an argument like if not M, then not J, not M, therefore not J, is a straightforward modus ponens, despite all the nots, as long as the antecedent, the first part of the premise, 1, is exactly affirmed in premise 2, then the consequent, the second part of the premise, 1, follows. What matters is the relation between the premises. Let's try out a sample argument. The Phoenix Mars lander exposed a bright white substance while digging in the Martian soil. The substance vanished after being exposed to sunlight for several days. The substance must have been water ice if it vanished when exposed to sunlight for several days. Thus, the Phoenix lander uncovered water ice. This is an example of modus ponens. The key connective here is the word if in the third sentence. If we use P to stand for the substance must have been water ice, and Q to stand for the substance vanished when exposed to sunlight for several days, then the third sentence reads P if Q. We know that this means if Q, then P. So once we notice that the second sentence asserts Q and the last sentence asserts P, we know that we're looking at an instance of modus ponens. Notice that the first sentence is just background information. We don't need to symbolize it. Now it's going to be your turn. On CN 360, you'll find a quiz that will allow you to exercise some of these critical thinking muscles that you're developing.